Hey YouTube, it's Larry. Welcome to Stewarding the Wealth Transfer. Today we're going to talk about what in the world is going on here. How can so many good people have such a different view of what's going on? And if you ask, Larry, what do you think? Let me tell you what I think. I think that we can't understand where we're at if we only look where we're at. All these people are getting different ideas and they've got different perspectives. And I think we need to go way back to what God was saying through people 300 years ago, 120 years ago, 80 years ago, 50 years ago, and 10 years ago. What was God saying to people that he was going to do? If we look at that and we know those things, I think that we can really understand what's going on. And I'm going to tell you that not everybody who's talking is getting it right, because they're absolutely conflicting with each other. And that's just part of the reality of being an adult and actually having discernment. And I'm not going to call out every person who's wrong or different, but so let's talk about that. Let's jump into a really deep conversation of, first of all, is it okay to have a different view? Do you have a different view of money than you did 20 years ago? If you're like me, I mean, I just actually turned 61. I can't believe I'm that old. But I'm looking at money a lot differently. I'm looking at my relationship with my kids a lot differently. It's much more important than I knew. I mean, and I've always prioritized it, but I just think it's so important. And I so appreciate the good relationship I do have with my kids. And so what about the value of a job? What about the implications of fear and how many people are motivated by fear and how much God can teach us by faith? I will tell you that I've spent a lot of time with God in the last 5 years, and it's impacting the way that I look at things. And I can't tell you that I know that everything that I think is perfectly right. But what I want to talk to you, and I've talked to you about this before, is there's a continuum of reality that we're learning, and there's things that we all believe, that we all were raised with, and when we look at it, even biblically, we find out it's really not the way that we thought. And over the next few videos, I want to begin to share things and talk about what do we do when we have to unlearn what we think that we know. And you might be going, well, Larry, what in the world are you talking about? I'm gonna throw one thing out. I'm not going to answer every question on it, but the majority of Christendom, and I'm going to say only 2% of the people in Christendom, maybe 5%, but I don't believe 1 in 20 believe this. How many of you believe that there's a big difference when the thief on the cross, who we know Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise, and then the Apostle Paul, who was martyred for the cause of Christ, along with almost all the other apostles? I think only one of the 12, and Paul was not one of the original 12, but one of the original 12, only one died of a natural cause. And so Paul ran the race in such a way as to win the prize. He encouraged others to do the same thing. Did he have a different experience in heaven than the thief who died on the cross? And obviously, if he just found out as an hour before he died, he didn't have a chance to do much, are they going to have the same experience? I'm going to tell you, I don't think they will. And I'm going to explain it more in the future. But what I want you to do, and you might be going, oh my goodness, I never even thought about that. But I mean, when you start to think about it, because let me tell you, Jesus was often asked who will be the greatest in heaven. And he never said, hey, don't even talk about that. That's not a thing. No, he said, if you want to be the greatest, you must become the servant of all. And so Jesus actually acknowledged that there was greatness, and if there's inferred greatness, then there must be those who are less. And so things are not going to be equal in the kingdom of heaven. And I think that's regarding the rewards. So that's one thing. What your homework, if you're all wound up about that, and I hope you are, is I want you to read Matthew's version of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and see what Jesus says about money and about rewards. And especially pay attention when it talks about fasting and praying and giving and where your treasures should be and when you're persecuted. All these things talk about rewards. Sometimes people want to put them in the connotation, well, those are only earthly rewards. But as you read those 3 chapters, you're going to find out, you know what? There's eternal differences that are going to be set aside for people who properly navigate with faith, is what I think part of the the way to do it is on earth. And so that's one of the things that we're going to begin to talk about. There's many other things. Everybody thinks they know it, but how many of you have known that even in the wealth transfer, if you believe in the wealth transfer, and I hope you do, because I really do, the things that we believe are not what everybody else believes. But we probably are believing things that aren't always true. And we have to go back to God's word, but there's people and history that have shown us. And here's the deal. I want to go back to the people what people believed who wrote God's word, who wrote the Bible, what the original authorial intent was, is how I want to understand the Bible. Now, I realize that we live in a Western American society. They wrote mostly from a Jewish, ancient perspective, but I want to understand the Bible the way that they meant it. And I think that there's a lot of things that are way different. In Acts 17:6, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These are the men who have turned the world upside down, and now they have come here also." And Jason has received them, and they are acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying there's another king named Jesus. Now, I don't see the church being accused of turning the world upside down in general, and I don't see the church being accused of going against the decrees of Caesar. And yet that's what the opponents of the church said in Acts 17, that these crazy Christians are turning culture upside down, and they're not agreeing with the rules of the government. I mean, that's what they were accused of. And I see, for the most part, a very congenial church. But that's not the kind of church that I believe that God, wants us to have. And so I have a little different perspective than the congenial church. I think that God wants us to be engaged. And I think we're supposed to, like the early church, we're supposed to impact culture. We're supposed to make a difference. We're supposed to be pushing back. And I believe that's what the wealth transfer is about. I've talked about it before. The wealth transfer isn't to create a bunch of country club Christians. The wealth transfer is because power and influence in culture come from those. There's the saying, it's not a biblical saying, but it's kind of a reality saying, he who has the gold makes the rules. And God, I believe, is going to use the wealth transfer to bring wealth into the kingdom of God to those who will steward it well, that they will use the influence to push back and mold culture in the way that God would have it. And so that's what I think God's doing. But what did God say that he was going to do a long time ago? Here's kind of this is going to open your eyes a little bit if you try to study this, because if you've been around to the different museums and stuff, if you've done a tour of probably the Smithsonian, and I don't know where all these are, but I do remember seeing them when I was young. The first time I went to D.C. was when I was about 11 years old. The last time I was in D.C. was on January 6th, and so that was an interesting time, definitely. I have some pictures from there, and it was actually one of the most patriotic, amazing days of my life, and so that was the last time I was there. But there's a story, and anytime it's really difficult to find the truth of a story, it makes me wonder, why would people not want us to know this story? Because when you go to Washington, D.C., you're going to see these paintings of George Washington having a vision and having an interaction really with an angel. And there was 3 different things he was told. Because, if you read history, our country was so close to not becoming a country because by all physical known ideas of the day, we shouldn't have been able to take our freedom with the huge amount of warships that the English brought over. They should have won, and so many times they could have won, but it was God's hand that was protecting us. But in the middle, I think it was actually coming into Valley Forge, and I could get some of the dates wrong. I'm going to include a video that I think portrays it accurately, but if you look at the other videos, you're going to find all these people, all these scholars that will say, now, yes, okay, now there is a painting of George Washington with this angel, but come on, tisk, you can't believe in that kind of stuff, and this really didn't happen. Well, it was published 3 times, this story, but it's such a wild tale, it couldn't be true. And the intellectuals of our day want to tell us that what happened to George Washington didn't happen at all. But the thing is, he had a dream, a vision, a real life experience of 3 future wars. And one was right in the middle of the Revolutionary War, and he saw that America was going to win and be on the other side. So he heard from God through an angel that he was actually going to win the war, which was great relief to him because it didn't seem like he was going to win. Then he saw that 100 years out from them winning and becoming a nation, that there was going to be a trouble that was going to come from Africa, and that the states were going to end up fighting. And it was really describing an interesting way of describing slavery. It was going to split the nation, and they were going to fight, and yet God was going to deliver them from that. And there was a third trouble that was going to come to the country, and this was in 300 years from the time that Washington was fighting this. It was about 300 years away, and he learned in this angelic encounter that the whole world was going to conspire against America, that Europe and the East and really the whole world was going to conspire against America, but that America was going to make it through it, and it was going to be fine on the other side, and it was going to be great, and once again the land would thrive. And so that's the time that we're entering in right now. And 300 years ago, I believe that George Washington did have an angelic encounter, and he was right on the first 2, history will show. And I think that we're going to make it through this on the other side. I don't think that we're going to disappear. I think God's got things for us on the other side of this experience. Well, what else are other prophecies that are legitimate that were said? Well, you know, the guy named William Seymour, who on Azusa Street in Los Angeles, a little bit over 100 years ago, he ended up starting what's equivalent to the Assemblies of God, the Foursquare, I think the Pentecostal Assemblies of God, or in another couple, amazing denominations, all started around 1906 to 1914 when the Azusa Street revival was going on, and they started speaking in tongues. And this guy, William Seymour, came and spoke because God showed him that if you really were, and this is going to go against what some of you believe, but this is just a history of what happened at Azusa Street. And so if you're on a channel that believes in the prophetic, I'm not going to be apologetic because I speak in tongues. I've been to a Baptist seminary where nobody spoke in tongues, and I would get in debates that I would not lose because I had the experience and I could understand the verses. And there's some verses that you have to understand that tongues is for personal edification, and it's for you to do yourself. And it's not necessarily wrong for you to pray in tongues under your breath when you're at church, but there's a difference. And I've never been used to speak out loud in tongues and give a tongue an interpretation. But I've seen it happen, scores of times growing up. One time on a youth trip, I was at an Indian Navajo reservation in Arizona, and one of our leaders on our youth choir stood up and gave a word in, we didn't know it, but it was definitely sounded like an Indian language. It was, odd. And there was an elder who was a Christian there that was an Indian. He goes, that person spoke a language of perfect Navajo with perfect accent, and then another person interpreted that word, and they interpreted it perfectly. And this older Indian gentleman who was probably like 80 years old, he said, I have never seen that happen. Anyway, I've seen, amazing things with tongues and interpretations. But prophecy was not something that I was really exposed to very much. I was always drawn to it. And the Bible even says in 1 Corinthians 12 to eagerly desire, it might be 14, verse 1, eagerly desire the greater gifts, especially the gift of prophecy. But I later in my life, thankfully, for the last 6 years, it's been something I've been able to, have some idea of. But as the Azusa Street revival wound down, but William Seymour had a prophecy, and he said, in 100 years or more, God is going to pour out his Spirit in a way on America that's far greater than what has ever happened before. And and people are going to see healings like never before. But the Spirit of God, that was the manifest Spirit of God, it was so thick in the Azusa Street revival that people described it as kind of a purple in color. It's kind of like a cloud, and it would gather on the floor, and kids loved to get down on the ground and play in it, and people could breathe, but you could see it, you could actually feel it. And it was like the manifest presence of God. And he said that that's going to come back in a greater way in the future than it ever has before. And then Smith Wigglesworth, about 30 years later, had a same vision. He saw that, hey, at the end, in the future, less than 100 years out, there's going to be an outpouring, and it's going to happen in America, and it's going to go around the world, that this Spirit of God is going to be poured out. There's going to be more healings. There's going to be more of this, more of that. And it's going to be the biggest outpouring of God in the history of the world. And then Kim Clement, I'm a huge fan of, and you probably believe in his ministry, otherwise you wouldn't follow this channel. He died in 2016, early 2016. So about 8 years ago, he died. But over his, 30 years of ministry, there's so many different times that he prophesied that what's coming is an apostolic reformation, and the Spirit of God is going to be poured out in greater ways than ever. And there's going to be huge troubles, and there's going to be huge trials, but the church is going to make it on the other side, and it's going to be amazing on the other side. And so it's not like it's going to be amazing on the other side, and there's going to be this apostolic reformation, and then boom, it's all over. So many people are thinking we're about ready to be done on the earth, and I just don't believe that. I believe that God is taking us through this very difficult time that George Washington foresaw. When you watch his dream, I'm going to reference it in the notes section so you can look at it underneath the title on the YouTube video. And you can watch that, and I believe that he did have that dream. And I think this is the most accurate telling. If you go look and start seeing other versions of it, you're going to see all kinds of people are poo-pooing it and say it couldn't happen. But I think to understand what we're going through right now, we have to look back and see what was prophesied. What was prophesied is we're going through an extremely difficult time. The whole world is conspiring against America, but America is going to succeed. We're going to make it on the other side. It's going to be awesome on the other side. The Spirit of God is going to be poured out. So often revival accompanies very difficult times. But I also believe that we're going to experience this wealth transfer, and Kim Clement confirmed it. And many prophetic voices have confirmed we're going to go through a wealth transfer. And I'm going to tell you that I think that the wealth transfer we're going to go through is very similar to the first one. And the first one happened when the people of Israel came out of Egypt, and Moses told the people, as God told Moses, said, go ask the people. And they basically plundered the Egyptians in the middle of all hell breaking loose for the Egyptians. It was the 10th plague. And their firstborn were dying in their flocks, and their firstborn kids were dying, the males. They got the gold, the silver, and all the fine clothes and everything, and then they began to go out. And it's talked about in Deuteronomy 6. He said, and when in verse 10 of Deuteronomy 6, and when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob to give you, with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of good things that you did not, with houses full of good things, and cisterns that you didn't have to dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you didn't plant, and then you're going to eat and you're going to be full. And he says, take care when that happens, lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And so I think that this wealth transfer is going to be very similar in that we're going to be brought out of bondage, and they had to wait 40 years to get the Egypt out of them. They came out of Egypt right away, but then they wandered around for 40 years. I don't think we're going to have to wander around for 40 years. I think we're going to be able to have access to the land of the giants. Remember how Caleb and Joshua wanted to go into the land. They brought a good report. Everybody else brought a bad report. But there was giants in the land, and they had to go in and be conquered. I think God is going to help us conquer, and there's going to be structure. But we, I believe, are called to rebuild the culture, because the culture is evil. We live in a slavery culture. And, you may not believe this, but this is what I believe. And I think that God is calling us, and we need to be engaged Christians. We need to be passionate about his kingdom. We are not just going to be sucked away without making a difference. I mean, I believe we prayed in the Lord's Prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. His kingdom is going to come, and his will is going to be done on earth. I think that God is saying that his kingdom is going to come down here, and he's looking for believers who will partner with him and agree to fight the giants of culture, stand up, and make a difference. And I think that the reason that we're going to be given wealth is so that we can influence what it's going to look like on each of the 7 mountains. So what I think's happening is we are going to make it through this. George Washington saw it. William Seymour saw it. Smith Wigglesworth saw it. Kim Clement saw it. We're going to make it through these difficult times, and the Spirit of God is going to be poured out. There's going to be great impact, and God is giving us this wealth transfer so that we can impact culture. So I hope that you're, ready to impact culture. And I think it's really exciting times. I mean, I think that money, I think the wealth transfer is moving. I can't believe what's happening in precious metals. I don't know where you're at with that. And I think that there's a time coming very shortly. I would have thought, honestly, I would have thought it would happen by now, but I can see that, crypto's going to explode when it's, not held back. And so it's been hard for me to come up with what to say, because I've been really busy learning so much at these seminars, but it's hard to talk because I want to begin to be able to bring out things that are hard to talk about. I think we have to reevaluate, what do we really know? Like, what is true? We know the Bible's true, but what if what you're taught in school isn't true? What if you've been told your whole life, even by your family, that you should just go get a normal job, but in reality, God has given you a destiny that you're supposed to go start a company. And you are starting to realize, man, I've been living safely, but I'm called to be a person of faith. I've been told just to live this little tiny life, but I'm realizing that God's calling me to live a great big life. I've got a great voice. I've never used it to serve God. I believe that he wants me to begin to write songs. Maybe that's you. Maybe you're supposed to write books. I'm going to, in a few days, release a video about, I got together with Mark down in LA and did an interview. He's the guy who helped me write my first, helped me write the second book, The Parable of the Dinar. He's helped me write my third book. And he's helped all kinds of people write books. And I think that some of you are who are passionate about writing, or even if you're passionate about editing, you're really going to like the next video, because that's going to be a short video about marketing. He's going to invite you to make contact with him. But I got to know him even better. He joined us for ice cream, and it was just really fun to get to know him. So I'm going to get stuff out at least once a week. I'm going on a good road trip. But it's been difficult because I think we need to have some debates. We need to examine what we think really the truth. What we clearly know out of the Bible, we know it's true. And I'm not asking you to question what we clearly know, but there's some things that we think we know. Some of us think that everybody in heaven is going to have the same experience. Yet Jesus said very clearly, if you want to be the greatest in heaven, then you need to be the servant of all. So obviously Jesus believes that there are greater and there are some lesser in heaven. Why isn't that commonly known? I mean, Jesus acted like everybody would know that. It's just a common thing. And yet, we don't know that. And so there's other things that we don't know. That Jesus acted like were common. And so we're going to begin to explore some of those things. But I appreciate you tuning in. I hope that you begin to look at it. Look at Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Begin to study. What did Jesus say about rewards? What did he say about money? And I will be back. And then if you have an interest in writing or editing, you'll really like the next video that'll come out in a few days. Thank you so much.